Welcome back to Sleeptime Historian. Tonight, we leave behind the great castles, crowded marketplaces, and noisy streets of medieval Europe and walk toward a place most people preferred to avoid. A place of silence, of grief, and of death. As the sun disappears below the horizon and a cold mist settles across the countryside, the church bells begin to ring in the distance. Their slow, heavy sound carries through the evening air, reminding everyone of a truth that no king, knight, merchant, or peasant could ever escape. One day, every life comes to an end. But while most people spent their lives trying not to think about death, there were a few whose entire existence revolved around it. Tonight, we are stepping into the dark and often forgotten world of the medieval gravedigger. Imagine waking before dawn on a cold morning sometime in the 14th century. The ground is damp beneath your boots. A wooden shovel rests against your shoulder. Somewhere nearby, a church bell announces another death. While others begin their day preparing for work in fields, workshops, or markets, your destination is very different. You are walking toward the graveyard. The medieval gravedigger occupied a strange place in society. Everyone needed his work, yet few wanted to be near him. He stood beside open graves, handled the dead, and spent countless hours surrounded by reminders of mortality. Some people respected him, others feared him, many avoided him altogether. Yet, without gravediggers, medieval communities could not function. Every burial depended upon them. Every funeral ended with their labor. Every epidemic increased their burden. Throughout this journey, we will explore what life was really like for these forgotten workers of the dead. We will follow them through mist-covered cemeteries and crowded churchyards. We will witness the long hours spent digging graves beneath rain, snow, and summer heat. We will experience the horrors of plague years when death arrived faster than graves could be prepared. We will hear the stories, superstitions, and fears that surrounded medieval graveyards after dark. We will discover how gravediggers lived, worked, and survived in a world where death was never far away. Along the way, we will encounter priests, mourners, plague victims, and ordinary villagers whose final journey ended in the graveyard. We will see how medieval people viewed death, what they believed happened after burial, and why cemeteries became places filled with mystery and legend. As darkness slowly settles over the churchyard and the last mourners return home, imagine standing alone among rows of weathered wooden crosses. The wind moves through the trees. Ravens watch from above. Somewhere in the distance, another church bell begins to ring. For most people, that sound signals sadness. For the gravedigger, it signals work. Another grave must be prepared. Another life must be laid to rest. Another long night may lie ahead. So settle in, relax, and allow yourself to drift back through the centuries to a world of ancient cemeteries, flickering lanterns, whispered prayers, and endless rows of graves. Because tonight, we are about to discover the dark life of a medieval gravedigger. Imagine being born in a small medieval village sometime during the early 1300s. Your life is unlikely to be filled with wealth, fame, or adventure. Most people never travel far from where they are born. They spend their lives farming, working simple trades, and struggling to survive. Yet among these ordinary villagers are a few individuals who end up performing one of the most unusual jobs in medieval society: digging graves. Unlike blacksmiths, bakers, or carpenters, few children dream of becoming gravediggers. The profession is often inherited, assigned, or accepted out of necessity. Sometimes a father teaches the trade to his son. Sometimes a poor laborer accepts the work because few others are willing to do it. The pay is modest, the work is difficult, and the reputation that comes with it can be uncomfortable. As a young boy, you first become familiar with the village graveyard. While other children play in fields or chase one another through narrow streets, you occasionally accompany an older gravedigger to the cemetery beside the church. At first, the place feels unsettling. Rows of wooden markers stand silently above the earth. Fresh graves appear from time to time. Villagers lower their heads respectfully whenever they pass. The older gravedigger teaches you practical lessons. How deep a grave should be, how to work efficiently through hard soil, how to avoid grave collapses during rainy weather. He speaks calmly about death, treating it not as a mystery but as a reality of everyday life. First, this attitude surprises you. Most people avoid discussing death whenever possible. The gravedigger cannot afford to. Over time, your fear begins to fade. The cemetery becomes familiar. The sound of church bells announcing a funeral no longer feels unusual. You start understanding something that many people never fully accept. Death is a constant companion in medieval life. Disease, accidents, war, childbirth, and famine claim lives regularly. Every village graveyard continues growing year after year. As adolescence turns into adulthood, you slowly realize that your future may already be decided. The shovel feels more natural in your hands. The churchyard feels more familiar than the marketplace. While others avoid the cemetery, you know every corner of it. Every path, every tree, every weathered grave marker. Without fully planning it, you have begun walking the same path as the gravedigger before you. Every gravedigger remembers the first grave they dig alone, and you are no different. One cold morning, the church bell rings before sunrise. The village priest approaches with news. An elderly villager has passed away during the night. A burial will take place tomorrow. The grave must be prepared. For the first time, the responsibility belongs entirely to you. Carrying your shovel across the dew-covered grass, you enter the cemetery. The morning fog hangs low over the ground. Birds are only beginning to wake. The village remains quiet. Standing among the graves, you look toward the patch of earth where the new burial will take place. For a moment, you hesitate. The task itself is simple. Digging is familiar work. Yet today feels different. This grave is not merely a hole in the ground. Before tomorrow ends, it will become someone's final resting place. A family will gather here. Prayers will be spoken here. Tears may be shed here. You push the shovel into the earth. Hour after hour, you work beneath changing skies. The soil grows heavier as you dig deeper. Sweat mixes with dirt despite the cool weather. Occasionally you stop to catch your breath and glance around the cemetery. Everywhere you look, there are reminders of generations who came before. Men, women, and children whose lives have already ended. As the grave slowly takes shape, an unexpected feeling appears. Not fear, not sadness, but responsibility. The villagers trust you with something important. They trust you to prepare the place where loved ones will say goodbye. They trust you to perform a task that few others wish to do. It is difficult work, yet it carries a quiet dignity. By evening, the grave is finished. You stand at its edge as the sun begins disappearing behind the church tower. Long shadows stretch across the cemetery. The cool air grows colder. Somewhere nearby, a raven lands on an old wooden cross. Tomorrow the mourners will arrive. Tomorrow prayers will be spoken. Tomorrow another life will join the countless others resting beneath the soil. And as you leave the graveyard and begin walking back toward the village, you realize something important. Your life will always be connected to this place. While others spend their days among the living, you will spend yours preparing homes for the dead. The life of a medieval gravedigger is far less dramatic than most people imagine. And yet, in many ways, it is far stranger. By now, you have become a familiar figure within the village. People recognize you immediately. Some nod politely as you pass. Others avoid eye contact altogether. Death makes many people uncomfortable. And because your work revolves around death, some villagers treat you with an uneasy respect. Your days begin early. Long before merchants open their stalls and farmers head into the fields, you are already walking toward the churchyard. Morning mist clings to the ground. Dew covers the grass. The cemetery sits quietly beneath the shadow of the church tower. Most days, there is no funeral. Contrary to popular belief, gravediggers do not spend every hour digging graves. Much of your work involves maintaining the cemetery itself. Wooden grave markers must be repaired. Overgrown weeds must be removed. Pathways must remain clear for mourners and priests. Fallen branches are collected after storms. The graveyard is both a sacred place and a public space, and someone must care for it. As you move among the graves, you begin noticing how each marker tells a story. Some belong to wealthy families with carefully carved stones. Others are marked only by simple wooden crosses. Some graves are visited often by grieving relatives. Others seem forgotten entirely. Seasons pass. Families move away. Memories fade. Yet the graves remain. The church bell occasionally interrupts your work. Villagers arrive seeking information. Priests discuss future burials. Family members ask where loved ones rest. Because you spend so much time among the graves, you often know the cemetery better than anyone else. You remember where people are buried. You remember the funerals. You remember the faces of those who stood crying beside open graves. As the years pass, something unusual happens. The cemetery becomes less frightening and more familiar. While others see a place of death, you see a place filled with stories. Every grave represents a life once lived. Every marker represents someone who laughed, worked, dreamed, and worried just like everyone else. By sunset, the graveyard grows quiet once more. The last visitors leave. The church doors close. Shadows stretch across the rows of graves. Another ordinary day has ended. Yet in the world of a medieval gravedigger, even an ordinary day is spent surrounded by reminders of life's most unavoidable truth. If digging graves is the physical side of the job, funerals are the emotional side. And no matter how many burials you witness, they never become entirely routine. The church bell begins ringing slowly through the village. Its sound carries across fields and narrow streets. Everyone understands its meaning. Someone has died. Before long, villagers begin gathering outside the church. Family members arrive dressed in dark clothing. Friends stand together speaking quietly. The atmosphere is different from ordinary days. Laughter is rare. Voices remain soft. Even children seem unusually quiet. Meanwhile, you make final preparations beside the grave. The earth you removed yesterday rests neatly beside the opening. The grave itself waits silently beneath the gray sky. Looking down into it, you are reminded once again that every person in the village will eventually make this journey. The funeral procession finally appears. At the front walks the priest carrying a cross. Behind him come mourners. Some hold candles. Some whisper prayers. Others struggle to hide their tears. At the center of the procession rests the coffin. simple and wooden for most villagers, more elaborate for the wealthy. As the group approaches, all eyes turn toward the grave. Prayers begin. The priest speaks about faith, mortality, and the hope of eternal life. Mourners bow their heads. Some cry openly. Others stare silently at the ground. For many, this is the hardest moment of all. Then comes the burial. Slowly, the coffin is lowered into the earth. The ropes creak softly. Family members watch through tears. The priest continues praying. A cold wind moves through the cemetery, rustling leaves and tugging at clothing. Eventually, the moment arrives when everyone understands that goodbye has become permanent. One by one, mourners place handfuls of soil into the grave. The sound is quiet but unforgettable. Earth striking wood. A simple sound, yet one that marks the end of a life. When the ceremony ends, people slowly return to the village. Conversations remain hushed. The crowd gradually disappears. Before long, only you remain. Now your final task begins. You carefully fill the grave. Shovelful by shovelful, the earth returns to its place. The cemetery becomes quiet again. Another burial is complete. As evening settles over the churchyard and the last rays of sunlight fade behind the horizon, you stand among the graves and realize something few others understand. Funerals last only a few hours for most people. For the gravedigger, they are part of everyday life. And tomorrow, when the church bell rings again, the cycle will begin once more. As the years pass, you begin to understand that death does not care about the weather, and neither can a gravedigger. Whether the sun shines brightly or storms sweep across the countryside, graves must still be prepared. The dead cannot wait for better conditions. Spring is often the easiest season. The ground is softer after winter rains. Flowers begin appearing around older graves. Birds return to the churchyard trees. Funerals continue as always, but there is a sense of renewal in the air. Even within a cemetery, life seems to return. Summer brings different challenges. The sun beats down for hours as you work. Sweat soaks your clothes. The soil becomes dry and stubborn. Digging requires strength and patience. Yet summer is also the busiest time for village life. Weddings, festivals, and harvest preparations fill the countryside. While others celebrate, you continue your work among the graves. Autumn arrives with cold winds and falling leaves. The graveyard changes color. Golden leaves gather around old gravestones. Mist becomes more common in the early mornings. The cemetery feels quieter somehow. Villagers spend less time outdoors. Days grow shorter. Darkness arrives earlier each evening. Then comes winter. Winter is the season every gravedigger fears. The ground hardens. Frost covers the cemetery. Sometimes the earth becomes so frozen that digging feels nearly impossible. Each strike of the shovel sends pain through your arms. Progress slows dramatically. A grave that might take hours in summer can require an entire day in winter. Yet people continue dying. The church bell continues ringing. The work continues. Standing in a snow-covered cemetery beneath a gray sky, you realize something important. While most jobs become easier or harder depending on the season, the gravedigger's responsibility never changes. No matter the weather, someone must prepare the final resting place. Most villagers visit the cemetery only occasionally. A funeral, prayer, a visit to a loved one's grave. You spend nearly every day there. Over time, the churchyard becomes more familiar than the village itself. You know every path, every tree, every weathered marker. You know which graves are old and which are recent. You know where generations of families rest beneath the soil. This familiarity creates a strange relationship with the cemetery. At first, being alone among hundreds of graves felt unsettling. Every shadow seemed suspicious. Every strange sound attracted attention. But years of experience slowly change your perspective. The cemetery becomes peaceful. During quiet afternoons, you work beneath the shade of ancient trees while birds sing overhead. Wind moves gently through the grass. Sunlight filters between gravestones. The silence is no longer frightening. It becomes comforting. Yet not everyone sees it that way. Villagers often avoid the graveyard after sunset. Stories spread through the community. Tales of wandering spirits, ghostly figures, strange lights appearing among the graves at night. Whether these stories are true hardly matters. People believe them. Because of your profession, many assume you must know secrets about the dead. Children ask questions. Adults whisper rumors. Some people even cross themselves when passing the cemetery after dark. You know better than anyone that most strange sounds have ordinary explanations. Wind, animals, loose branches. Yet even you occasionally feel uneasy during certain nights, especially when fog covers the graves and moonlight casts long shadows across the churchyard. In those moments, standing alone among countless reminders of mortality, it becomes easy to understand why so many legends are born in places like this. And as darkness slowly settles over the cemetery once again, you finish your work and look across the rows of graves stretching into the distance, wondering how many more stories still remain beneath the earth. Most people never see the graveyard at night. By sunset, villagers have returned home. Church doors are locked. Candles burn behind windows throughout the village. Families gather around fires while darkness slowly spreads across the countryside. But occasionally, your work keeps you in the cemetery long after everyone else has left. These nights feel different. The familiar churchyard transforms completely beneath the moonlight. Gravestones become dark silhouettes. Trees sway gently in the wind. Every sound seems louder than it should. A branch snaps somewhere in the darkness. An owl calls from above. Leaves rustle across the ground. Even though you know the cemetery better than anyone, your imagination sometimes begins creating possibilities that daylight would quickly dismiss. Medieval people live in a world filled with superstition. Stories about ghosts, demons, wandering spirits, and supernatural creatures are common. Many villagers genuinely believe that cemeteries become dangerous after dark. Some claim they have seen pale figures walking between graves. Others swear they have heard voices whispering in the night. The church officially discourages such beliefs, yet the stories continue spreading from generation to generation. As a gravedigger, you hear them all, and while you rarely believe them, there are moments when the darkness feels unusually heavy. Moments when the cemetery seems older than time itself. Moments when you understand why people fear these places, because death leaves a powerful impression on the human mind, and nowhere is death more visible than here. Years spent among graves expose you to countless stories. Every village possesses its own legends. Some are old, some are recent, some may contain a grain of truth. Most almost certainly do not. Yet all of them reveal how medieval people viewed death. One story speaks of a wandering spirit searching for an unmarked grave. Another tells of a nobleman whose ghost appears whenever storms approach. Children whisper about skeletons rising from the earth. Travelers speak of mysterious lights floating above burial grounds late at night. These tales spread quickly because they touch upon a fear shared by everyone: the fear of what happens after death. During long evenings, villagers gather around fireplaces and repeat these stories. Details change with each telling. New versions emerge. Soon, nobody remembers where the tale began. Yet the legends survive. You often listen quietly as people discuss them. The irony is impossible to ignore. The villagers fear the cemetery because they rarely visit it. You spend nearly every day there and know it better than anyone. Still, even the most practical gravedigger occasionally pauses when strange fog drifts between the graves, or when moonlight creates shapes that seem almost human from a distance. Perhaps that is why these stories endure. Not because people truly believe them, but because graveyards remind everyone of life's greatest mystery. As another evening settles over the churchyard and the final light disappears behind the horizon, you lock the cemetery gate and begin walking toward home. Behind you, the graves remain silent. The dead remain at rest, and the legends continue growing in the imaginations of the living. For most of your life, death has arrived one person at a time. A funeral on Monday, another burial a few weeks later, perhaps an elderly villager during winter, perhaps a child taken by illness. This is the rhythm you know. Slow, predictable, familiar. Then everything changes. The rumors arrive first. Travelers passing through the village speak of a terrible sickness spreading across distant lands. Entire towns are said to be suffering. Merchants tell stories of streets filled with the dead. Priests speak in worried tones after hearing news from neighboring parishes. At first, few people believe the stories. Medieval Europe has always known disease. Illness comes and goes. Most villagers assume this will be no different. But then the first victim appears. A farmer who seemed healthy only days before suddenly becomes feverish. Strange swellings appear beneath his arms and around his neck. His condition worsens with frightening speed. Within days, he is dead. Soon another follows. Then another. Then another. The church bell begins ringing more frequently than ever before. Funerals that once occurred weekly now occur daily. Families gather around graves with terrified expressions. The priest continues offering prayers, but even he seems uncertain. No one understands exactly what is happening. Some believe God is punishing humanity. Others blame poison wells. Some whisper about witches. Others fear the end of the world itself. Meanwhile, you continue digging. Every morning begins the same way. Another death. Another grave. Another family saying goodbye. The cemetery starts changing. Fresh graves appear everywhere. Ground that once remained untouched for years is suddenly needed again. The churchyard expands further and further as more bodies arrive. Exhaustion becomes your constant companion. Your hands blister, your back aches, your muscles burn from endless labor. Yet there is no time to rest. The dead continue arriving. And for the first time in your career, you begin realizing something terrifying. Death is no longer following its usual rules. Something much larger is happening. Something that threatens the entire village. And standing among rows of freshly dug graves beneath a gray medieval sky, you wonder whether anyone will escape what is coming. As the weeks pass, the disease spreads relentlessly. The village no longer resembles the place you once knew. Markets grow quiet. Roads become empty. Church services attract fewer people. Doors remain shut. Windows stay closed. Fear hangs over everything. Neighbors begin avoiding one another. Friends stop visiting. Families isolate themselves inside their homes. Every cough attracts attention. Every fever creates panic. People constantly watch for signs of sickness. A healthy man today may be buried tomorrow. A healthy family this week may disappear by next week. The uncertainty is unbearable. As a gravedigger, you witness the transformation more clearly than anyone. You see families arrive at funerals with terror in their eyes. Not only are they grieving, they are wondering whether they will be next. Many mourners stand farther apart than usual. Some refuse physical contact entirely. Others whisper desperate prayers throughout the ceremony. The village priest grows increasingly exhausted. So do you. Day after day, graves continue appearing. Some days you dig from sunrise until darkness. Some nights you work by lantern light because there simply are not enough hours. Sleep becomes difficult. Every time the church bell rings, you know what it means. Another death. Another burial. Another family devastated. The cemetery that once felt peaceful now feels overwhelming. Fresh mounds of earth stretch in every direction. Rows of graves seem to multiply overnight. The smell of damp soil never leaves your clothes. Your hands remain stained with dirt. Even when you return home, the work follows you. And perhaps the worst part is this: no one knows when it will end. No one knows how many more will die. No one knows whether tomorrow's grave is meant for a stranger or for someone they love. Standing alone in the churchyard as cold wind moves between the gravestones, you look across the growing sea of fresh graves and understand a truth that few others can fully grasp. The village is no longer merely afraid of death. The village is waiting for it. There comes a point when the cemetery can no longer keep up. For months, you have worked harder than ever before. You have dug grave after grave. You have buried neighbors, farmers, merchants, children, and elders. You have watched the churchyard expand beyond anything you imagined possible. But eventually, even that is not enough. The deaths become too numerous. The disease moves too quickly. The traditional rituals begin breaking down. There simply isn't enough time. The priest cannot perform lengthy ceremonies for everyone. Families cannot gather for every burial. Individual graves become increasingly difficult to prepare. And so a terrible decision is made. Mass graves. The very words send fear through the village. For generations, people expected individual burials. A marked resting place. Proper farewell. A place where relatives could pray and remember. Now circumstances make such traditions impossible. Large pits must be dug, bigger than any grave you have ever created. Long trenches cut into the earth. Day after day, you work alongside other laborers preparing these enormous burial sites. The task feels unreal. Your shovel cuts through soil for hours. The trench grows deeper, longer, wider, until it resembles something closer to a scar across the landscape than a grave. When bodies arrive, the reality becomes impossible to ignore. There are too many, far too many. Some are wrapped in cloth. Others lie in simple wooden coffins. Many arrive without family members. Entire households have been lost. Entire stories have ended. And yet the work continues, because regardless of grief, fear, or exhaustion, the dead must still be buried. The cemetery has become a place unlike anything you have ever known. Not a place of occasional mourning, not a place of quiet reflection, but a place overwhelmed by death itself. By now, you have spent years surrounded by death. You have attended hundreds of funerals. You have prepared countless graves. You have watched generations pass through the cemetery gates for the final time. Yet the plague changes everything. For the first time, even you begin questioning your own limits. Every day brings new bodies. Every day brings new sorrow. Every day brings reminders of how fragile life truly is. People often assume gravediggers become immune to emotion, that they stop caring, that death eventually becomes ordinary. The truth is far more complicated. You never stop noticing. You never stop understanding the sadness. You simply learn how to continue despite it. But during the plague years, continuing becomes harder. You recognize faces everywhere. The baker who sold bread, the blacksmith who repaired tools, the farmer who waved whenever you passed. Now they rest beneath the soil, and more arrive every week. The cemetery becomes a map of loss. Every grave tells a story. Every marker represents a life interrupted. As months become years, something changes inside you. Death no longer feels distant. It no longer belongs to other people. You see it every day. You work beside it. You understand that one day, another gravedigger will stand where you stand now. Another shovel will cut into the earth. Another grave will be prepared. And eventually, it will be yours. Strangely, this realization does not frighten you as much as it once would have. Instead, it creates a different feeling: acceptance. Because among all people in the village, few understand mortality better than the gravedigger. You have witnessed the beginning and end of countless stories. You have seen rich and poor buried beneath the same soil. You have learned that every human life, no matter how powerful or humble, ultimately follows the same path. And as the sun sets over the cemetery and long shadows stretch across the rows of graves, you lean upon your shovel and look across the churchyard that has become your life's work. A place of sorrow, a place of memory, a place of endings, and strangely enough, a place that has taught you more about life than anyone else in the village. The longer you work as a gravedigger, the more you realize that your profession places you in a strange position within medieval society. You are needed by everyone, yet welcomed by few. The villagers know your face. They know your name. They know where you spend your days. Yet when they see you approaching, many become unusually quiet. Conversations change direction. Smiles become smaller. Some people nod politely before continuing on their way. Others avoid looking directly at you altogether. It is not hatred. It is not even dislike. It is something far older and more powerful: discomfort. Human beings have always struggled to face mortality. Most people spend their lives trying not to think about death. You spend every day surrounded by it. In their eyes, that makes you different. Children are often fascinated by you. They ask strange questions about graves, skeletons, and ghosts. Parents quickly pull them away before they can ask too much. Some villagers believe that spending so much time among the dead must change a person somehow. Others imagine that you possess knowledge that ordinary people cannot understand. Rumors occasionally follow you through the village. Some claim you have witnessed spirits rising from graves. Others insist you know secrets buried beneath the churchyard. Most stories are ridiculous, but they continue spreading anyway. As years pass, you become accustomed to this unusual reputation. You learn that the village views you as something both familiar and mysterious. People depend upon your work during their most painful moments, yet they rarely wish to discuss what you do. And so you continue your life in the space between acceptance and isolation. A man surrounded by people who need him but never fully understand him. Despite the rumors, despite the awkward glances, despite the distance many villagers maintain, there is another side to your profession that becomes clearer with time. Beneath the discomfort lies genuine respect. Most people could never do what you do. They could not spend hours digging graves beneath freezing rain. They could not stand beside grieving families day after day. They could not carry the emotional burden that follows every funeral. Yet you do, year after year, funeral after funeral. The village priest understands this better than anyone. He sees your dedication. He watches you arrive before sunrise and remain long after others have gone home. During epidemics, when fear keeps many villagers indoors, you continue working. During storms, you continue digging. During winters, when the ground feels like solid stone, you continue preparing graves. Gradually, some villagers begin seeing beyond the shadow of death that surrounds your profession. They notice your reliability. They notice your patience with grieving families. They notice that every grave receives the same care whether it belongs to a wealthy merchant or a poor farmer. Death treats all people equally, and so do you. There are moments when families thank you with tears in their eyes. Moments when elderly villagers shake your hand after a funeral. Moments when someone quietly tells you they appreciate what you do. These moments are rare, but they remain with you. They remind you that your work matters, that the cemetery is more than a place of endings. It is also a place of remembrance, a place where the living honor those who came before them. And because of that, the gravedigger becomes more than a laborer. He becomes a guardian of memory itself. As darkness falls over the medieval countryside, the world begins to change. During daylight hours, the village feels ordinary. Farmers work fields. Merchants sell goods. Children play in dusty streets. But after sunset, imagination takes control. Fires burn inside cottages. Families gather together, and stories begin. Many of those stories involve the cemetery. Villagers speak of strange figures seen walking among the graves. Travelers tell tales of glowing lights drifting through churchyards at midnight. Old men swear they once heard voices coming from beneath the earth. Every village has its own legends. Every cemetery has its own mysteries. Some stories are centuries old. Others appeared only recently, yet all of them grow larger with every retelling. Children listen with wide eyes. Adults pretend not to believe, yet still glance nervously toward dark windows whenever the wind howls outside. Because deep down, everyone fears the same thing. Not ghosts, not monsters, but death itself. The cemetery represents a question nobody can answer completely. What happens after life ends? Medieval people think about this question constantly. Religion provides comfort, but uncertainty remains. And wherever uncertainty exists, stories quickly follow. As the village sleeps, the graveyard stands silently beneath the moon. Gravestones cast long shadows across the earth. Mist drifts slowly between rows of crosses. The scene appears almost designed to create legends. It is no surprise that so many stories begin there. One evening, your work keeps you in the churchyard long after sunset. The last mourners have gone home. The church doors are locked. Even the village dogs have stopped barking. Only silence remains. First, everything feels normal. You have spent years in this cemetery. You know every path and every grave. Yet as darkness deepens, familiar surroundings begin to feel strangely unfamiliar. Moonlight filters through moving clouds. Shadows stretch and shift across the ground. A distant owl calls from somewhere beyond the church walls. The sound echoes through the night air. Then comes the fog. Slowly it creeps across the cemetery floor, wrapping itself around gravestones and trees. Shapes appear and disappear within it. For a brief moment, a crooked gravestone resembles a standing figure. A twisted tree branch looks like an outstretched arm. Logic tells you there is nothing to fear. Experience tells you the same. Yet your heart beats a little faster anyway. This is how legends are born. Not through real ghosts, but through darkness, uncertainty, and imagination. Medieval people live in a world without streetlights, without scientific explanations, without the comforts modern people take for granted. The night feels enormous, mysterious, alive. Standing alone among hundreds of graves, you finally understand why villagers fear this place so much. The cemetery forces people to confront something they spend their entire lives avoiding: their own mortality. Eventually the clouds part. The moon shines brightly once more. The strange shapes return to being ordinary gravestones. The fog begins to fade. The cemetery becomes familiar again. You gather your tools and prepare to leave. As you walk toward the gate, you glance back one final time. The graves remain silent. The dead remain at rest. Yet you know that tomorrow night, somewhere in the village, another story about ghosts and graveyards will be told beside a warm fire, and the legends of the cemetery will continue growing for another generation. Winter arrives slowly at first. A colder wind during the mornings, frost gathering on rooftops, bare trees standing motionless against gray skies. Then one morning you wake to find the entire village covered in snow. For most people, winter means spending more time indoors beside the fire. For the gravedigger, winter means the hardest work of the entire year has just begun. Death does not disappear when snow falls. Illness continues. Accidents continue. Old age continues. The church bells continue ringing. Yet now every grave becomes a battle against the earth itself. The ground freezes solid beneath your feet. Each strike of the shovel feels like striking stone. Hours pass with little progress. Your hands ache from the cold. Your breath forms clouds in front of your face. Snow settles on your shoulders as you work. Sometimes villagers watch from windows as you struggle against the frozen ground. They see only a man digging a grave. They do not see the effort hidden beneath every movement. There are days when a grave that would normally require half a day now consumes an entire day from sunrise to sunset. The cold finds its way through every layer of clothing. Your boots become soaked. Your fingers grow numb. Yet stopping is not an option. Somewhere nearby a family waits for a burial. Somewhere nearby mourners prepare to say goodbye. The grave must be finished. During particularly harsh winters, entire sections of the cemetery become difficult to use. Frozen earth forces you to search for places where digging remains possible. Sometimes you work by lantern light because darkness arrives before the task is complete. Snowflakes drift through the yellow glow while the cemetery around you disappears into darkness. It is during these long winter evenings that the graveyard feels most isolated. The world seems distant. The village appears quiet and asleep. Only you remain outside, working among the graves while icy winds sweep across the churchyard. Yet there is something strangely beautiful about it as well. Fresh snow covers old graves like a white blanket. Every sound becomes softer, every movement slower. The cemetery transforms into a silent landscape where even time itself seems frozen. Standing there beneath falling snow, you realize that generations of gravediggers before you faced the same struggle. Long before your birth, other men stood in this same churchyard fighting against winter so that the dead could rest with dignity. Long after you are gone, others will do the same. The snow will fall, the church bells will ring, the graves will be dug, the cycle will continue. Among gravediggers, there are stories passed down through generations. Stories not of ghosts or monsters, but of difficult nights. Nights when storms arrived without warning. Nights when tragedy struck entire families. Nights when the cemetery seemed endless. One winter evening, such a night arrives for you. Heavy snow falls across the countryside. Strong winds howl through the trees surrounding the church. Most villagers remain safely inside their homes. Then the church bell rings. A traveler has died while seeking shelter from the storm. The burial cannot wait. Tomorrow more snow is expected. If the grave is not prepared tonight, conditions may become impossible. And so you return to the cemetery after sunset. Lantern in hand, shovel over your shoulder, you step into the darkness. Snow immediately begins collecting on your cloak. The wind pushes against you. Visibility is poor. The churchyard looks unfamiliar beneath the storm. Gravestones emerge from the darkness only to disappear again moments later. Every step requires effort. Every shovel of earth feels heavier than the last. Hours pass. The storm grows stronger. The lantern flame flickers violently. Sometimes you wonder whether it will survive at all. Yet you continue, digging, resting, digging again. Eventually exhaustion replaces thought. There is only the work, the cold, the wind, the grave. Nothing else matters. By midnight, the task is finally complete. You stand at the edge of the finished grave and look across the cemetery. Snow covers everything. The world appears silent and endless beneath the storm. For a brief moment, you feel completely alone. Not just alone in the cemetery, but alone in time itself. Then the church bell rings once more in the distance. The sound carries through the winter night, and suddenly you remember that you are part of something larger. A tradition stretching across centuries. A duty connecting generations. The storm may pass, the snow may melt, but the responsibility remains. As you leave the cemetery and disappear into the darkness, fresh snow begins covering your footprints almost immediately. By morning, it will be as if no one was ever there at all. By the time you have spent years as a gravedigger, funerals no longer surprise you. Yet they never become meaningless. Each burial follows familiar traditions, but every funeral tells a different story. Some are attended by hundreds, others by only a handful of mourners. Some are filled with tears, others with quiet acceptance. But all of them end in the same place, the cemetery. On funeral mornings, the church becomes the center of village life. Villagers gather before sunrise. Candles flicker inside stone walls. Priests prepare sacred texts. Family members arrive carrying grief that words cannot fully describe. The coffin rests near the altar while prayers echo through the church. As the gravedigger, your role often begins long before the procession reaches the cemetery. You ensure the grave is ready. You coordinate with priests. You prepare the churchyard. Then you wait. Eventually, the church doors open. The procession emerges. At the front walks the priest carrying a cross. Behind him come altar boys holding candles. Then the coffin appears, carried slowly by relatives or friends. Behind them follow mourners dressed in dark clothing. The entire village watches. For medieval people, funerals are not private events. They are community events. Everyone understands that one day they too will make this final journey. The procession moves slowly through village streets. Heads bow respectfully as it passes. Church bells ring overhead. Prayers are whispered. Children watch silently from doorways. It is a scene repeated countless times across medieval Europe. Yet, for those experiencing it, the moment feels unique, because every funeral represents a life that can never be replaced. Eventually, the procession reaches the cemetery gates. The mourners gather around the open grave. The priest begins speaking. Prayers rise into the air. Tears appear. Some family members struggle to remain standing. Others stare silently at the coffin as if trying to memorize the final moment. Then comes the lowering of the coffin. The ropes tighten. The coffin descends slowly into the earth. Every funeral reaches this point, the moment when death becomes undeniably real, the moment when goodbye becomes permanent. There is one sound every gravedigger knows better than anyone else: the sound of earth falling onto a coffin. It is a simple sound, soft, brief, ordinary. Yet for grieving families, it often becomes the moment they remember forever. After the priest finishes his prayers, mourners approach one by one. Some carry flowers, others carry nothing at all. Many simply stand beside the grave in silence. Then a handful of earth is taken from the pile beside the grave and gently dropped below. The sound echoes upward. For many families, this act symbolizes acceptance, a final farewell, a final act of love. You have witnessed this ritual hundreds of times, yet it never loses its emotional weight. Rich merchants perform it. Poor farmers perform it. Mothers, fathers, children, soldiers, priests, all eventually stand beside a grave and let the earth fall from their hands. In that moment, social status disappears. Wealth disappears. Power disappears. Only humanity remains. After the mourners leave, your final task begins. The cemetery grows quiet once again. Voices fade into the distance. The church bell falls silent. The family returns home. Only you remain. Slowly, carefully, you begin filling the grave. Shovelful after shovelful, the earth returns to where it came from. The work is repetitive, yet it encourages reflection. You think about the person who has just been buried. You think about the family left behind. You think about the countless others resting beneath the surrounding graves. By sunset, the grave is complete. A marker is placed. Fresh earth forms a small mound. Another story has joined the cemetery. Another life has become memory. As the evening sun casts long shadows across the churchyard, you lean on your shovel and look across the sea of graves surrounding you. Generations rest here. Entire histories lie beneath the soil. Kings and peasants may live different lives, but in the end they all arrive at the same destination. And standing alone among the graves, you understand a truth that many people spend their entire lives avoiding. Death is not the opposite of life. It is part of life. And no one learns that lesson more clearly than the medieval gravedigger. The years pass more quickly than you ever imagined they would. When you first picked up a shovel as a young man, the cemetery seemed enormous. Endless rows of graves stretched across the churchyard. The future felt distant. Old age belonged to other people. Death belonged to other people. You were simply the gravedigger. Now decades have passed. The church tower still rises above the village exactly as it always has. The bells still ring across the countryside. The cemetery continues growing year after year. But you have changed. Your hair has turned gray. Your hands are rough and scarred from thousands of hours spent digging. Your back aches more than it once did. Cold winters feel colder. Heavy soil feels heavier. The work that once seemed easy now requires effort. And yet every morning you still walk through the cemetery gates. There is comfort in routine, comfort in familiarity, comfort in knowing every path, every tree, every grave. Many of the people buried here are individuals you once knew personally. You remember their voices. You remember their faces. You remember the funerals. Some were childhood friends. Some were neighbors. Some were people you watched grow from children into adults before eventually burying them yourself. Entire generations have passed before your eyes. You have watched fathers buried beside sons, mothers buried beside daughters, husbands buried beside wives. The cemetery has become a history book written in stone and earth. Each grave contains a story. Each marker represents an entire lifetime of hopes, fears, successes, and failures. Visitors occasionally ask questions. Who is buried here? When did they die? What happened to them? More often than not, you know the answers. You remember. You have become something more than a gravedigger. You have become the keeper of memories, the guardian of stories, the silent witness to generations of village life. Yet as the years continue passing, a strange thought begins visiting your mind more frequently. You notice empty spaces within the cemetery, places where future graves will eventually appear. And for the first time, you begin wondering where your own grave might be. The thought does not frighten you. Not anymore. After a lifetime spent surrounded by death, fear slowly transforms into understanding. You know better than anyone that death comes for everyone. The king, the merchant, the priest, the farmer, the gravedigger. No exceptions exist. The realization is strangely peaceful, because if death is unavoidable, there is little reason to fear it. As the sun sets behind the church one evening, you pause beside a row of old graves. The golden light stretches across the cemetery. Birds settle into the trees. The village grows quiet. And for a moment, you realize that you have spent more time here than almost anywhere else in your life. This cemetery has watched you grow old, just as you have watched it grow. Every gravedigger eventually digs a final grave. The strange thing is that they rarely know it at the time. The morning begins like any other. The church bell rings. A burial has been arranged. The weather is pleasant. Nothing feels unusual. You gather your tools and walk toward the cemetery. The familiar path beneath your feet has been traveled thousands of times before. You know every stone, every turn, every tree. The churchyard welcomes you once again. As always, work begins immediately. The soil is soft. The grave takes shape slowly, steadily, methodically. Hour after hour, your shovel cuts through the earth. The movement feels automatic now. Years of experience guide every action. There is a rhythm to grave digging, a rhythm you learned decades ago. Dig, lift, throw, repeat, the same pattern, again and again. Yet today something feels different. Perhaps it is age. Perhaps it is exhaustion. Perhaps it is simply intuition. But while standing at the bottom of the grave, you find yourself reflecting on your life. You remember your first burial, your first winter, your first plague, the countless funerals, the thousands of faces, the endless ringing of church bells. You remember every season spent within these walls. And suddenly it becomes impossible to ignore the truth. You have devoted your entire life to helping others complete their final journey. There is honor in that. More honor than most people realize. By sunset, the grave is finished. You climb out slowly, brush dirt from your clothes, and admire your work one last time. The evening air feels calm, peaceful. The church bells ring softly in the distance. The cemetery glows beneath the fading sunlight. You stand there for several moments, simply listening, simply remembering, unaware that this will be the final grave you ever prepare. Because sometimes life does not announce its endings. Sometimes the final chapter arrives quietly, like a sunset, like a prayer, like the last shovelful of earth falling into place. Years later, the church bell rings once again, but this time it rings for you. The news spreads through the village slowly, then quickly. The old gravedigger has died. For a moment, many villagers struggle to imagine the cemetery without you. You had always been there, always working, always walking among the graves, always standing quietly in the background of funerals. Now, for the first time, your place is empty. The irony is impossible to ignore. The man who buried generations of villagers now requires a burial of his own. Preparations begin immediately. Another gravedigger arrives. Perhaps a younger man. Perhaps someone you once taught. Perhaps someone who learned the trade by watching you. Now he carries the shovel. Now he prepares the grave. The cycle continues. Funeral day arrives. The church fills with people. More people than expected. Many come not because they were close friends, but because they respected you, because you helped their families during moments of grief, because you stood beside them during funerals, because your work mattered. The priest speaks warmly. Stories are shared. Memories are remembered. Outside, the cemetery waits. The same cemetery where you spent your entire life. The same cemetery whose paths you walked thousands of times. The same cemetery you cared for through storms, winters, and plague years. Now it welcomes you one final time. The procession moves slowly through the gates. The coffin reaches the grave. Prayers are spoken. Heads bow. Tears appear. And as the coffin descends into the earth, a remarkable truth becomes clear. You are no different from the people you buried. Not because your life lacked meaning, but because you shared the same human journey, the same beginning, the same ending, the same fragile existence. For decades, you helped others complete that journey. Now yours is complete as well. The funeral ends. The mourners return home. The priest leaves. The church bells finally fall silent. Evening settles across the village. And once again, the cemetery grows quiet. The new gravedigger finishes his work. Fresh earth covers the grave. A simple marker is placed. Nothing grand, nothing extravagant, just enough for future generations to remember. Night slowly arrives. The stars appear overhead. Moonlight spreads across the churchyard. Wind moves gently through the grass. Everything feels peaceful, perhaps more peaceful than it has ever felt. For decades, you spent your life among these graves. You listened to funeral prayers. You dug through frozen winters. You endured plague years. You watched generations come and go. You carried the weight of countless farewells. Now there is no more digging, no more church bells, no more long days beneath rain and snow, only rest. The cemetery remains exactly as it always has. Silent, patient, endless. New graves will appear. New funerals will be held. New gravediggers will take up the shovel. The village will continue changing. Children will become adults. Adults will become memories. Generations will pass. Centuries will pass. Yet somewhere within the churchyard rests a man who spent his entire life preparing homes for the dead. A man who understood mortality better than almost anyone else. A man who discovered that graveyards are not merely places of death. They are places of memory, places of love, places of history, places where countless human stories quietly come to an end. And as the moon rises above the ancient church tower and the wind whispers softly through rows of weathered gravestones, the old gravedigger finally receives something he spent a lifetime providing to others, place to rest, forever. And perhaps, as sleep slowly takes you as well tonight, you can almost hear the distant church bells fading into the darkness, growing softer and softer, until at last, only silence remains.